Welcome. You are shortly going to see an interview I conducted with Deputy District Judge Elpha Cointe. The interview is recorded in 3 parts. The topics discussed are set out in the description box below each of the videos. By way of background, Elpha is a highly regarded family law practitioner. She specialises in sexual abuse cases and also cases involving neglect. She also deals with adoption cases, including international adoption. Elpha also sits as a Deputy District Judge at the Central Family Court. She's a member of One Garden Court Family Law Chambers. I hope you enjoy the interview.
So Elpha, welcome and thank you for agreeing to be interviewed by me. How are you?
Thank you for having me, and I'm very well.
I think I'd like to start by asking you a really obvious question, but why did you pursue a career in the law?
There was nothing deliberate about my choice of coming to the law. My academic career was mostly about doing things I had an interest in. So if it was an interesting subject, I could do it because I was more likely to stick with it and perhaps do work better at it because I was actually interested in the subject. And I was interested in the law, but I was also interested in sociology. And I for a long time I thought I would do sociology, but a law course seemed quite interesting to me. I had an interesting relationship with my father, who quite liked a good debate, and we would debate a lot, and I remember that a lot from my childhood and my teenage years. There was a lot of debating. Sometimes it was just arguing, but there was mostly a lot of debating, and I was quite attracted to that kind of arena where you could just have a sharing of information and ideas and arguing about them, and the law seemed to be a way in which I could explore that element of myself. So really it was more, yes, this is an interesting area, I'd quite like to try it out, and that was the reason for doing the law, but nothing else. I wasn't actually thinking about even a career in it. I didn't know what I was going to do with it after I'd done it. It was just, yeah, I like this. Let's see what happens.
So you talked about your father loving and you loving to have a debate with him. So let's talk about your family background. So did anyone else in your family go to university at that time when you were growing up? Were there any of those types of role models in your family?
So my parents were both from Dominica in the Caribbean, and they had come to this country in the sort of the very late 50s, early 60s, and they already had children in the Caribbean.
Right.
And then when they got here, they had myself and my younger brother. So I was sort of separated from my older siblings in the Caribbean. But I do have an older brother who grew up in the Caribbean and then spent time in America, and he went to university and in fact got a doctorate. And so I did have siblings who'd gone to university, but they weren't part of my immediate world. And so in that respect, going to university for me was very much of the little pod that we were in England. I was the first of the pod in England to go to university and do a degree.
So you were a bit of a trailblazer in your family in England?
A bit, yes, a bit.
And in terms of the area that you decided to practice in family law, what was it about family law that got your attention?
In in the dark ages when I was first called, and it's been a very long time.
1988, Elpha.
Okay, thanks. Yeah,
Don't hate me for saying that.
Yeah, thank you very much. I was trying to use the numbers because every time I think about it gives me the heebie-jeebies, and I feel all kind of. But yes, back then, when you came to the bar, you know, you did the bar finals, and then most people would get a pupillage, and pupillages then were a mixed affair. So sets of chambers didn't tend to specialize very much. They'd have you know, just groups of barristers who did a variety of different areas of law. So I went, my first pupillage, well, my only pupillage, I was very fortunate in getting a pupillage for a whole 12 months. And it was in a mixed set that did lots of different things. So it meant that I spent my pupillage doing lots of different areas of law, but mostly actually crime, some bits of civil and family. And I really liked the crime. I've got to say, I loved doing crime.
There is nothing like criminal law as far as I'm concerned.
Can I just say, I mean, when you think about the law, I was all about things like, okay, this is going to show my age. There was a program called Crown Court that used to be on.
I remember it. Yeah, lunchtime. I think it was on it.
Lunchtime in the weekday, and I loved Crown Court. And then there was another American program called The Paper Chase, student lawyers, and so, you know, principled and always thinking about, you know, the next big thing that they were going to be doing and wanting to trailblaze and change the world. And I felt like that, and I felt that this is the kind of thing I want to be doing. So and crime really feeds into that, because crime is theatre. That's what it is. Yeah. It's being on a stage and performing, and your audience is a jury or a bench of magistrates or something like that, and it is just pure theatre, and I loved all of that. It was great. But then I started to do bits of family, and family is very different, because family is it's not in open court, so there, you know, there's no public gallery, the public aren't allowed in. It's a closed environment, there's no jury, so there's no performance. Judges aren't interested in your best performance or your interesting anecdotes or stories, or, you know, you can't do a jury speech to a judge, they're not interested in that. But there was something about the people involved in family cases that was different from crime. These tended to be people who seemed to be there for reasons not of their own making. Things had happened to them, circumstances had happened to them, or life had happened to them. Family law, and I always did, well, I did two sorts of areas of family law. I did a lot of domestic violence. So I represented, I spent a lot of time representing a lot of women, mostly, who were the victims of domestic violence. And then I did lots of cases that involved children who were being brought into the care system. And so these were families who were in some kind of crisis of some kind, or that there was abuse within the family arena. So those were the kinds of people I tended to come across in those early days when I did family. And that was very different from the kinds of people I was coming across in crime. Families tended to be, well, they're a family and there are things happening in their family, and for some reason it's all broken down, and now they're involved in a court arena, or they're vulnerable. There was just something a little bit more real about that. I could see myself in their situations. I could see how this can happen to anybody. even though in reality, people who become involved in the care system in particular tend to come from a particular strata of society. If you don't have money, if you are, of the socially dispossessed, you are more likely to come to the attention of social services and the court system. But that said, I just found it really quite. I really found it quite inspiring working with the women who were victims of domestic violence. I thought it felt to me like this was just very important work. And the same doing the care work I just felt like there was something very important about protecting children and finding ways to, resolve situations where the children in particular didn't have choices most of the time. Again, certainly things were just happening to them, but also to help parents who may have been unjustly accused of neglecting their children or abusing their children, because that happens too. And there was just something about that really attracted me, more than the theatre of crime.
I suppose you must get asked this all the time, but how do you deal with those types of cases emotionally? It must have such an impact on you. Is there any strategy or technique that you use so that you are protected?
It is quite difficult, actually, to separate yourself from the circumstances of your client sometimes, and it is deeply emotional all the time, all of the time. It's raw, and it can be really, really ugly, and that's hard. What I do, and what I think a lot of family lawyers do, is that you draw quite strict lines for yourself about how involved you become in a case. You have to maintain a distance, because otherwise it's too difficult. I liken ourselves to a bit like surgeons. I suppose, if you're a cancer specialist, you can imagine that every day seems like it's just another horrific story of someone who's dying, and what can you do about it? But you can't take that home, because frankly it would destroy you. You can't, and I do know that in the early days I did often get too close, and I would have sleepless nights worrying about cases, and I would be, I would be, wandering the streets, and all that's happening in my head is I'm thinking about my case, and I'm thinking about these people.
I suppose that leads into my next question. I was going to ask you about the pros and cons of family law, working in the family field. So I think you've kind of touched on one of the cons, how emotional it can be. What about the pros?
This is going to sound trite and ridiculous, but I really genuinely feel like the work that we do is about saving the children. And that just sounds a bit ridiculous, but it is. And frankly, it doesn't even matter who I'm representing. It doesn't matter which side I'm on. Because I've represented all sorts of people. So I've represented children, I've represented abusers, parents who've done horrific things to their children. I've represented local authorities who have removed children and had them adopted, so that they never see their natural parents ever again. These are all really, all these sides have their own negative connotation. It's quite difficult, but in the end, as a group, and I've found this always in family law, all of the lawyers, I've always felt as if we all are working towards one aim, which is getting the best outcome for children, regardless of who we're representing. And that, frankly, is the only thing that makes it worth it, because otherwise it is just too dark.